the Cathedral of the Three Kings, built in Cologne between 1248 and 1880. It all started with the Three Kings. Following a star, Melchior, Balthasar and Gaspar arrived in Bethlehem to pay homage to Jesus. From 1164 AD, the city of Cologne boasted of possessing their relics. The jewelled gold casket containing their remains is still the most famous reliquary in Western Christendom, visited by pilgrims from all over Europe. Encouraged by this success, the ecclesiastical authorities decided in 1248 to build a new cathedral and commissioned a master mason of whom we know nothing but his name, Meister Gerhard. The only document witnessing its construction is a drawing on parchment of the facade made in 1280 by his successor, Master Arnold. Two towers rise to 500 feet, 157 metres, doubtless inspired by the two newly built great towers of Notre Dame in Paris, a characteristic cathedral known at the time as being in the French style, like Reims or Amiens. Later, they were said to be Gothic. The cathedral is a monument, a signal. Visible from far away, its towers proclaim the glory of God. They symbolise the importance of the relics and the ambition of the bishop. Started in the middle of the 13th century, Cologne Cathedral was not finished until the end of the 19th century. It is at once contemporary with the Gothic style and with the symbols of modernity, the railway station and the metal bridge across the Rhine. It miraculously survived bombing during the Second World War. The facade and the towers are decorated with arches and tabernacles. These narrow house shapes with pointed roofs and gables, these triangular elements. Everything here points up to the sky, taking the eye ever higher. The architecture helps the faithful to get closer to God. At the foot of the towers is the main entrance, the portal, and its tympanum richly ornamented with statuary. It is an educational decoration, a catechism in stone for an illiterate population. The church is a community gathering place, 8,000 metres square without partitions or corridors, to allow the crowd of faithful to take part in the Eucharist, the celebration of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The faithful attending the Mass occupy the central part of the church, the nave. At the end of the nave is the altar where the priest officiates. Beyond the altar is another space where the choir is protected by a half-height partition covered in frescoes, reserved for the chapter, the hierarchy of the church, and which houses the reliquary of the Three Kings. The nave, altar, choir, and reliquary trace a symbolic axis leaving behind the rumours of the world and drawing the pilgrim from the profane to the sacred. This major axis goes from west to east, towards the Orient, in the direction of the rising sun, that symbolises the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The cathedral is said to be oriented. a shorter volume, the transept crosses the nave at right angles. The two volumes form a cross, emphasised by the statues of the apostles and saints, ornamenting only the pillars along the nave and the transept. In its architecture, the church revives the Passion of Christ in stone. The cathedral has more than symbolic virtues. It organises more prosaic and more lucrative functions, the flow of pilgrims. On either side of the nave are wide side aisles that triple the floor space to house more worshippers. The pilgrim's path continues through the ambulatory that surrounds the choir. 7 small chapels radiate from the ambulatory to increase the capacity to say masses and receive offerings, and bring the pilgrims nearer to the reliquary. With the symbolical organisation of these spaces and their functions, Cologne Cathedral follows on from the great Romanesque churches of earlier centuries. But it also embodies a radical rupture. Unlike the Romanesque churches, a generous amount of light is allowed to enter and the building is much higher. The Romanesque Abbey of Conques, built a century earlier, is 43 metres high. Complete with its towers, it could be contained in the nave of Cologne. The side aisles enhance the height of the nave that rises to 43 metres, the equivalent of 15 stories. Three elements space the upper reaches. Above the wide, 21-metre-high arcades that open onto the side aisles is a pierced gallery, the triforium, which goes all round the cathedral. The spacing of the colonnettes and the smaller arches, scarcely 5 metres high, highlights the immense stained glass windows, more than 20 metres high, in the upper part of the nave. Everywhere there is a single design in every possible size. In the walls and the vaulting, the pointed arch. Unlike the Roman arch, whose vault is a semicircle, the sides of the pointed arch incline from the almost vertical to the apex. The spreading force is reduced. It gives a larger opening than a semicircular arch. In Villard de Honnecourt's sketchbook, round about 1230, there is a drawing of a pointed arch and 2 men wrestling. A physics lesson on the balance of forces as in rib vaulting, this new construction method in which crossing 2 arches spreads the load, lightens the walls, and makes it possible to build higher. An architectural revolution, a technical revolution, an exploit for a period when the laws of physics were unknown and the only tool was a plumb line. The pointed arch draws fine ribs that cross in the middle of the vaults. Situated under the groins, they transfer the weight from the centre of the vault to the 4 supports, the capitals on top of the pillars. "92 vaults to cover the whole of the cathedral, including nave, transept, choir and apse. The cross ribs make it possible to reach across wide spaces. Above the altar is a span of nearly 20 metres, twice as far as a Roman arch could reach. Each of the ribs stands on a colonnette. They are grouped around pillars. In the middle of the side aisles are pillars with 8 colonnettes. Beside the nave are 12 colonnettes, under the towers 34 and 42 colonnettes. In the cathedral, the position of each pillar makes it possible to comprehend the distribution of the load. They stand on foundations, stone masses 50 metres deep. Calculating the load is easy. Put as much stone under the ground as there is above. The pillars and vaults are placed symmetrically around an axis that divides the nave in two. The lateral force is balanced from wall to wall, from one buttress to the other successfully from vault to vault. The widespread use of cross ribs frees the walls from their load-bearing function. Thus they could be lightened and the stone be replaced by glass. Light enters freely through stained glass windows that fill the greater part of the walls of the side aisles and through the clerestory high above the nave. At the same time as these architectural innovations, there was a new theology reminding that God is light. The true light which lighteth every man as a promise of eternity. Outside the walls, in the open air, the load-bearing structure continues, but it is an architectural landscape that is hard to understand. In contrast with the uncluttered volume of the nave, the exterior looks like a tangle of bridges and points rising to the heavens. A spiky and exuberant form that in classic times were considered barbaric, hence the pejorative term Gothic. This stone landscape that seems impossible to decode conceals a second major innovation in Gothic architectural construction, the flying buttress. Massive buttresses stand against the wall and are surmounted by volumes stretching up to the sky called abutments. Stone bridges, the flying buttresses, thrust against on one side of the upper volume of the nave and on the other side on the abutments. These are topped with points called pinnacles. Surrounded by flying buttresses and pinnacles is the roof, whose steep slope symbolises spiritual ascension. The wind surface area is huge. Since the 13th century it has been covered by lead sheets, roofing weighing 600 tons. In the upper part of the nave, where the cross ribs transfer the weight of the roofs and the vaults, lateral force pushes the walls outwards. The flying buttresses balance these sideway forces. The counterthrust equals the thrust. The forces are transferred to the abutments. The weight of the pinnacles directs the forces downwards to the ground. To sustain the weight of the vaults and the roofs of the side aisles, lower and less heavy, flying buttresses are not needed. The abutments are sufficient to maintain the balance. Reproducing the spread of the pillars in the nave, the buttresses and abutments create a vertical pattern all along the top. The higher the buttress rises, the more slender it becomes, ending in a cylindrical tip pointing skywards, the pinnacle decorated with finials. On either side of the nave stand 3 rows of buttresses, one directly above the walls of the nave, one in the middle of the side aisles, and one above the wall of the side aisles. Each buttress in the central row pierces the roof of the side aisles and rests on a pillar. The join is invisible. Half inside, half outside, a single axis. Contrary to the pinnacles that add weight, the flying buttresses are hollow, decorated with elegant rosettes. The lateral thrust is not concerned with weight. The flying buttresses soar from one abutment to the next to counter the thrust generated by the vaults and the roof. At the intersection of the transept and the nave, the lateral thrust requires flying buttresses crossing at right angles. None of this intricate construction is concealed. It is displayed, integrated into the decoration. The open-work flying buttresses, the pinnacles and their finials, the regularity of the pointed arches, all impose a plastic prospect. A strange architecture, where the skeleton pierces the skin of the building to design a volume with neither walls nor roof. Here the form directly embodies the balance of forces. This is what the 19th century rationalists admired, those like Viollet-le-Duc and the principal architects of the modern movement, such as Mies van der Rohe. Cologne Cathedral is a Gothic masterpiece. For 300 years, the engravings and pictures of Cologne showed quite a different image of the cathedral. It lacked nave and transept, and had only one hardly started tower. An abandoned site, no more money. Gothic was out of fashion. A crane remained on the roof. It had to wait until the end of the 18th century when Goethe and Heine, who saw the Gothic as a romantic architecture, reopened the debate about finishing the building. Sulpitz-Boisseret published a book of engravings of the cathedral in the style of those of the medieval master mason. This reclamation was upheld by a nationalist movement that saw the Gothic as an authentic German art, a revenge against the neoclassicism of the French invader. But it was the political strategy of Frederick William IV of Prussia that restarted work. He made it a symbol of German unity, and although he was a Protestant, paid for half the work, the other half coming from donations and a lottery. In 1842, the site was reopened amid great pomp. For its sponsors, it was no longer a question of celebrating the precious reliquaries, but of reaffirming the power of Germany as a modern and finally united nation. The works were to take 40 years. More than 500 workers, directed by the architects Zwirner, then Vochtel, were to erect 2/3 of the present cathedral. But nothing indicates the dates of the construction of the choir, the transept, or the nave. The 19th century worker built Gothic. A plethora of human-sized motifs, tabernacles, finials, pinnacles and rosettes invade the facade. 7,000 square meters, the largest church facade area in the world. The cathedral beats all the records, a monument of colossal dimensions. In 1880, when the cathedral was inaugurated, it was the world's tallest building, 157 meters. This record was only beaten 18 years later by the 187-meter-high Singer Building in New York. Only the 14th century mason's marks, alongside rare traces left by the suspension of building work, like the impression of a two-pointed roof that covered the nave and side aisles, indicate the very long story of the building work. Under the roof, hidden from view, is the single innovation, a metal frame. After long debates with the partisans of a wooden roof frame, more in accord with the Gothic spirit, metal was chosen, 25 years before the Eiffel Tower. A fine, pointed arch framework bears the heavy weight of the roof. Beneath this slender metal framework, the vaults of the 13th century choir hint at the design of the cross ribs that support them, there where flimsy pieces of wood hold in place the heavenly stars. As with all Catholic churches, the cathedral is like a picture book, inspired teaching for those who could not read. A rich collection of pictures and statues evoking the life of Jesus Christ or the saints, the journey of the wise kings, or the Last Judgment. Since the 13th century, the stained glass windows have played their part in this instruction, colouring the light with the sanctity of the images. In 2003, the cathedral chapter commissioned Gerhard Richter, the most celebrated of contemporary German painters, to design a new window for the south transept. The theme suggested was the 6 martyrs of the 20th century. Refusing that idea, Richter created an abstract composition of 11,263 squares of coloured glass. It was hardly finished before Cardinal Meissner declared that this work does not clearly reflect our faith and will be better suited to a mosque or a Protestant church. Yet, based on the unrepresentable nature of the divine, the painter returned to the origins of Gothic art, the search for light as exalted in the Gospel according to St. John. I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. The cathedral continues to be a constant building site. In Cologne, they say that the work will not be over until the day of the apocalypse.